Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we are going to be doing one of the projects on FreeCodeCamp that is a part of the new responsive web design course. It's called the Learn HTML Forms by Building a Registration Form, and we will start with step 1. Welcome to the registration form project. Start by adding your doc type HTML declaration at the top of the document. Okay. Below the doc type, add an HTML element with the language attribute set to English. Next, add an opening and closing head and body tags within the HTML element. Add a title and a meta element to the head. Give your project a title of registration form and give a chart set attribute with the value of UTF-8. Okay. Next, nest a self-closing link element within the head element. Give it a rel attribute and a value of style sheet with an href attribute of styles.css. Within the body, provide a heading context for the content by adding an h1 element with the text registration form. Below the heading, use the following text within the paragraph element to encourage users to register. The VH unit stands for viewport height and is relative to 1% of the height of the viewport. It's time to spruce up the project with some CSS. Begin by giving the body a width of 100% and a height of 100 VH. Sorry. Now get rid of the horizontal scroll bar by setting the body default margin added by some browsers to 0. This is better. Now make the background easy on the eyes by changing the body background color to this, and then the text change color to this. Okay, so As suggested by the title, you are creating a form, so after your paragraph element, insert a form with an action attribute targeting this link. The method attribute specifies how to send form data to the URL specified in an action attribute. The form data can be sent via a GET request as the URL parameters with the method equals GET, or a via POST request as the data in the request body with the method equals POST. Set the method attribute to send your form data via POST request. As the form will have 3 distant sections, add 3 field set elements within your form element. The first field set will hold name, email, and password fields. Start by adding 4 label elements to the first field set. Now add the following text to the label elements. The REM unit stands for root EM and is relative to the font size of the HTML element. As the label elements are inline by default, they are all displayed side by side on the same line, making their text hard to read. To make them appear in separate lines, add a display block to the label element and add a margin of 0.5 REM 0 to separate them from each other. Nest an input element within each label. Be sure to add each input after the label text and include the space after the colon. Step 18. Following accessibility best practices, link the input elements and the label elements together using the for attribute. Use first name, last name, email, and new password as values for the respective ID attributes. Specifying the type of attribute of a form element is important for the browser to know what kind of data it should expect. If a type is not specified, the browser will default to text. Give the first two input elements a type attribute of text, and the third a type of email, and the fourth a type attribute of password. The email type only allows emails with an @ sign and a dot in the domain. The password type obscures the input and warns if the site doesn't use HTTPS. The first input element with a type of submit automatically sent to submit its nearest parent form element. To handle the form submission, after the last field set element, add an input element with the type attribute set to submit and a value attribute set to submit. At this point, you should be able to submit the form. However, you might notice not much happens. To make the form actually more interactive, add a required attribute to the input elements of the first field set. Certain type attribute values come with built-in form validation. For example, type equals email requires the value be a valid email address. Add custom validation to password input element by adding a minimum length attribute with a value of 8. Doing so prevents inputs of less of 8 characters from being submitted. With the type equals password, you can create a pattern attribute that defines a regular expression that the password must match the considered value. Add a pattern attribute to the password and require the input match to be this. Okay, so copy this. Let us go to the next part of the registration form. This section will ask for the type of account the user is opening and will confirm the user has read the terms and conditions. Start by adding 3 label elements to the second field set. Users will be allowed to choose either personal account or business account. Do this within each of the first 2 elements. Add 1 input element with the type equals radio attribute. Okay. For the terms and conditions, add an input with the type of checkbox for the 3rd label element. Make this input element required because the users should not sign up without reading the terms and conditions. Within each corresponding label element, and immediately after the input element, add a space and add the following text. You only want 1 radio input to be selected at a time. However, the form does not know the radio inputs are related. To relate radio inputs, give them the same name attribute with the value of account type. Now it's not possible to select both radio inputs at the same time. Follow the accessibility best practices by linking the input elements and the label elements in the second field set. Use personal account, business account, and terms and conditions as values for the respective ID attributes. To finish this field set off, link the text, terms and conditions in the third label to the following location. Moving on to the final field set, what if you wanted to allow a user to upload a profile picture? Well, the input type file allows just that. Add a label with the text upload profile picture and nest the input accepting the file upload. Add another label after the first with the text, insert your age, years, and nest the input with the type of number. Next, add a minimum attribute to the input and the value of 13 because users under the age of 13 should not register. Also, users probably will not be over the age of 120, so add a max attribute with the value 120. Now, if someone tries to submit the form with the values outside of this range, a warning will appear and the form will not submit. Adding a drop-down to the form is easy with the select element. The select element is a container for the group of option elements, and the option element acts as a label for each drop-down option. Both elements require closing tags. Start by adding a select element below the two label elements, then nest 5 option elements within the select element. Nest the select element with its option elements within the label element with the text, "How did you hear about us?" The text should come before the select element. The drop-down options are currently empty. To give them content, add the following text to each subsequent option element. Submitting the form with the options selected would not send the useful value to the server. As such, each option needs to be given a value attribute, without which the text content of the option will be submitted to the server. Give the first 2 options a value of quotes and a subsequent option element's value attributes from 1 to 4. The text area element acts like an input element of a typed text, but comes with added benefit of being able to receive multi-line text and the initial number of the text rows and columns. Users will be able to register with a bio, add a label with the text provide a bio at the end of the field set, add a text area element inside the label element. Note that the text area requires a closing tag. Link in applicable form elements and their label elements together. Use profile picture, age, refer, and bio as the value for respective ID attributes. The text area appears too small. To give it an initial size, you need to add rows and column attributes. Add an initial size of 3 rows and 30 columns. To give campers an idea of what to put on their bio, the placeholder attribute is used. The placeholder attribute accepts text size, which is displayed until the user starts typing. Give the text area a placeholder of "I like coding on the beach." With the form submissions, it is useful and good practice to provide each submittable element with a name attribute. This attribute is used to identify the element in the form submission. Give each submittable element a unique name attribute of your choosing, except for the two radio elements. The HTML for the registration form is finished. Now you can spruce it up a little bit. Start by changing the font to Tahamo and the font size to 16px in the body. Center the H1 and P elements by giving them a margin of 1 EM auto, then align their text to the center as well. Center the form element by giving it a margin of 0 auto, then fix the size to the maximum width of 500px and a minimum width of 300px. In between that range, allow it to have a width of 60 VW. During the development, it is useful to see the field set default borders. However, they make the content appear too separated. Remove the border and add a 2 rem of padding only to the top and bottom of the field set. Be sure to remove the padding from the left and right. To give the field set elements a bit of separation, select them and give them a border bottom. Okay. The border of the last field set element looks a little bit out of place. You can select the last element of a specific type using a last of type CSS pseudo class like this. It would be nicer to have a label text appear above the form elements. Select all the input text area and select elements and make them take up the full width of their parent elements. Also add 10 pixels, 10 px of margin to the top of the selected elements. Set the other margins to 0. For the second field set, you want the input and the label text to appear on the same line. Start by giving the input elements and the second field set a class of inline. Select only the inline elements and give them a width of unset, and this will remove the earlier rule which set all the input elements to a width of 100%. Add some space between the inline elements and the label text by giving it a right margin of 0.5 EM. If you look close enough, you will notice the inline elements are too high on the line. To combat this, set a vertical align property to middle. To make an input and text area elements blend in with the rest of the background theme, set their background color to this and then give a 1 pixel solid border with the color of this. Okay. Currently, if you type in the input or text area elements, you will not be able to see inside the text. Also, their heights are too small to be easy to use. Fix this by setting the color to F and setting their minimum height to 2F. You want the select element to remain within the white background, but now it's not getting the same minimum height as the input and text area elements. Move the minimum height property and value so that all three element types have the same minimum height in the select element. Okay. To style the submit button, you can use an attribute selector which selects the element based on the given attribute value. Here's an example. The above selects input elements and the name attributes of the value password. Now display the attribute selector to the style submit button. Okay. With a display of block, the submit button sits flush against the left edge of its parent. Use the same technique used to center the form to center the submit button. To make the submit button look more in line with the rest of the form, give it the same height as the other fields. Also increase the font size to 101 REM. To make the submit button appear more distinct, give it a background color of this and a border color of right. Lastly, for the submit button, you want to separate it from the field set above. Adjust its width to be never be below 300 px. Change the margin property to include 1 EM at the top and bottom while leaving the right and left margins set to auto. Then set the width as described above. Most browsers inject their own default CSS properties and values for different elements. If you look closely, you might even be able to notice that the file input is smaller than the other text input elements. By default, a padding of 1px, 2px is given to the input elements so you can type it in. Using another attribute selector, style the input and type file. Using another attribute selector, style the input with the type of file to be the same padding as the other input elements. Speaking of padding, the submit button is sitting at the bottom of the form elements. Add a 2em padding only to the bottom of the form. Last but not least, change the text color of the terms and conditions link to, okay. And I think that's it. Here's a preview of our registration form. You can put information in there. Password, personal account, I accept, upload a file, put in your age, how did you hear about us, blah, 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 submit. Pretty cool. Awesome. Thank you guys for watching the video. Have a great day.